because I think you don't know it. I'm starting because I want to build on what you already know. It's not much harder to divide integers, right? We're not just dividing, we're dividing integers here. And if you're trying to divide integers, think about what you know about dividing in the first place, right? When you first learned to divide, you learned it probably two different ways of modeling it. If you had 8 divided by 2, one way was how many groups of 2 can you make out of 8? Make groups of 2 and count them, right? So obviously you can make 4 groups, right? So that's one way you found that the answer to that is, right? Count how many groups of this number you can make out of this number. That's one way you learned how to model division. The other way you learned how to model division was make this number into that many groups, right? Do you see the difference? So this would be saying, if I made 8 into 2 groups, how many are in each group? There's 4 in each group, right? You remember, sorry, you kind of see those two ways of modeling division. You can either say, how many of these fit into there? Or if you take this and make it into that many groups, how many do you have? Those are the two different ways to model it. You can use those two to figure out what makes sense for integers, because if you have now negative 8 divided by negative 2, which of those two models can you use to figure out what that is? So if I have negative 8 now, here's negative 8 if we're using blue for negative. If I have negative 8 and I want to divide it by negative 2, you can use the model that how many groups of negative 2 can I make out of negative 8? How many groups of negative 2? There's one group of negative 2. There's another. It's 4, right? There's 4 groups of negative 2 there. This is positive 4, not negative 4. It's the same answer as if they're both positive, because you can split it into 4 groups of negative 2. You can't really model it the other way, which is make it into that many groups. It's hard to make it into negative 2 groups. You can't really model it by making it into negative 2 groups. Here you had positive divided by a positive. It gave you a positive. Here you had negative divided by a negative. What does that equal? Negative divided by negative, what is it going to give us? Positive. It works the same way as multiplying, okay? Essentially, the rule is the same thing here. If the signs are the same, and you're multiplying or dividing two things, the answer is positive. If we model it the other way here, though, if we have negative 8 and we divide it by positive 2, so now we got a negative divided by a positive. If you take negative 8 and for this, you can't really do it by saying, how many groups of this number can you make out of this? You can't say how many positive 2s are there in negative 8. But you can do it the other way, which is take negative 8 and make it into this many groups. You can make it into 2 groups. If I take the negative 8 and make it into 2 groups, what do I have? There's one group. There's another group. How much is in each group? If you make it into 2 groups, how much is in each group?
4.
Now the blue ones are representing what though? Negatives, right? So what is in each group? What's in there? Negative 4 in each group, right? If you take a negative number and divide it into a positive number of groups, it's going to be negative. This would be like if you said, well, we owe $8 and there's 2 of us, right? There's 2 people. You owe $8 and there's 2 people. What's the result of that if you shared it out? If you owe $8 and there's 2 people, how do you share that equally? Because that's what dividing is, right? Sharing equally. Each person owes $4, right? That's why it's negative. This is negative. If you have 2 things that are different, right? If you have a negative divided by positive, you get a negative. Okay? And the other way is hard to model with the picture. If you have a positive number and you divide it by a negative, this one's pretty hard to, divided by a negative. If you have positive 8 and you divide it by negative 2, that one's hard to model with the integer chips. You can't really. But you can follow the pattern here. If you have positive 8 and you divided it by positive 2, it'd be positive. If you divide it by negative 2, what's the answer going to be? It's going to be negative. It's going to be negative 4. That one you can't really model in a concrete way, but it can follow the pattern here. Positive divided by negative is going to give you a negative. If the signs are different, the answer is going to be negative if you're dividing two things. Signs different, answer is negative. Okay, that's what you need to know about multiplying and dividing. Again, that's most of the unit. If you look at the table of contents, you're doing integer multiplication, you're doing integer division, and then we got to look at order of operations stuff, and we'll do that last. I'm assuming you have enough to go to here. Some of you are in various places, right? If you're still in that section 8.1 or 8.2 or something like that, you're probably a little bit behind, okay? And you need to get caught up pretty quick. Some of you are way ahead here. If you're working on 8.5, make sure you're asking and looking at examples and doing it right, okay? Showing steps and stuff like that. Can you get going on working on your study guide and making some progress?